I'm with Dudi Mevorch from the Israeli Museum, and we're talking about the Cradle of Christianity, seeing the scriptures come to life. Now, Dudi, you're going to walk us through what you can see here at the Israeli Museum. We're here at the model of the temple. Tell us a bit about this.
We are next to the model of Jerusalem in the late Second Temple period, that is in 66 CE. It's a huge, vast model. It's built over more than 1,000 square meters, and it was built in the early 60s by a private hotel manager in a different site in Jerusalem before Israelis could cross to the eastern side of Jerusalem and see many of the important sites. So his initiative was to build a model that will allow Israelis to see those places and understand this crucial moment. 66 was the beginning of the great Jewish revolt against the Romans. So what we see here is actually Jerusalem as it looked at its peak moment, the end of the Herodian period, with all the monumental buildings, the center of which is the Temple Mount and the temple itself. So the choice was to choose the best professor of history and archaeology, Professor Michael Aviona, and charge him with this huge task of imagining Jerusalem in 3 dimensions 2,000 years ago. So it's never easy to reconstruct historical or archaeological buildings, and if you do so in an article or presentation, you can speculate and offer a few options. But if you build a model in 3 dimensions, you have to decide and take decisions. So the sources upon which the sources that he worked with to get his data were, first of all, the archaeological excavations, but in the 60s they were not that large. Here and there in other places, the remains that are still seen, like the walls of the Temple Mount and other things, and the historical sources, Flavius Josephus to begin with, the Mishnah, and other Roman sources that describe Jerusalem, and parallel sites from Roman and late Hellenistic sites around the world. So he took all these together and step by step reconstructed Jerusalem in a genius way. Now, almost 60 years later, we know that he has done a phenomenal work, and most of his speculations prove to be right with future excavations. Some of them are different from his assumptions, and he always said that the most important thing that you need when you build a model of historic nature, the most important tool is the hammer, to knock off the mistakes you have done. And indeed, we've done some changes to the model since it was built. So originally it was built on a hilltop in Jerusalem, not far from the museum. You can see it. It's called the Holy Land Hotel. And the man who initiated it was Hans Kroch. And then in 2006, there was a decision to do a huge development project where the hotel stood. And the question was, where would the model be moved to? I don't know if it's divine intervention or any other thing, but we had an open field just west of the Shrine of the Book that holds the Dead Sea Scrolls from the same period, right next to in the museum grounds. And luckily for us, the decision was to move it to here. The model is built from Jerusalem stone. That was another decision taken by the builders, and it is built from more than 1 million cubes of Jerusalem stone. So how do you move 1,000 square meter stone model?
That was one of my questions. How do you actually move this? It's amazing.
It is amazing. And the answer is that we had to cut it into 1,000 squares, cut it with a diamond saw, and build the topography here at the museum grounds, because the model is built according to the right directions and to the topography of Jerusalem, and move it. And we did so. There's some surprise with the numbers here or some thing. It was moved in 2006. It is the model of Jerusalem in 66, and it took 66 days to move it and open it in 2006. Wow. But really a work of art, actually. This model is not only research, but also a work of art built at the grounds, and it enables people that come to see Jerusalem to see something which is very difficult usually to grasp as you walk through the streets of Jerusalem, to see sites, because they're twined into modern buildings, and it's very difficult to get the big picture. But here you get sort of a bird's eye view of the whole city and how it's spread and how it developed, and the monuments within it, most of which, the public monuments, are built by Herod the Great. And it's a great tour either before you go to the sites or after you return from them, to understand the bigger picture of Jerusalem.
How long did it actually take to build this?
It took actually 5 years originally to build it. It was all private investment, and it was completed in 66, a year before the Six-Day War, that enabled people to go to the old city and see the sights. However, it is still a huge attraction. It has been for the last 60 years for all tourists and guides, and also for research purposes, because it enables us as researchers to look at the relation between the sites, to see the city plan, and to understand things that would be very hard to understand otherwise.
Must be amazing for you just to see this every morning.
It is. It really is amazing. And the nice thing at the museum is that many of the finds and exhibits that are in the galleries relate directly to sites that you see in the model. So you can actually correlate, and the model gives context to the exhibition in the galleries of the museum.
So this would really be the temple that Jesus saw, wouldn't it?
Yes, this would definitely be it. So this is exactly the city that Jesus has seen and walked through its streets, and this is the Temple Mount where we know of all his actions. You can see at a first glance at the city that it looks like every other Hellenistic Roman city in the region. But the second glance shows you that there's only one temple for one god, which is a huge difference from all the other Roman cities. And also that there's no sculptures, because doing images in Judaism of the Second Temple period is totally prohibited. So the Temple Mount itself is a huge building elevated above the city, and it looks like a huge Roman forum or a sacred precinct. It is in fact the largest sacred precinct in Roman times, bigger than any other Roman precinct in the world, which is not a small thing for Judea. But this is the way Herod operated. He did everything bigger and better and nicer. But within this very classic Roman architecture, an Eastern style building is planted. This is the temple itself. So it's another example of Herod's character. He does things in two different ways. His legs are planted, one in the west and one in Judea, with Eastern traditions. And he builds the Jewish temple bigger and larger than it ever was within Roman architecture. So he knows who his masters are, but he also knows his citizens, and he serves both.
So the second temple was actually bigger than the first temple?
Much bigger. Herod builds the second temple on the site of the second temple that was built originally by Ezra and Nehemiah, and then refurbished by the Hasmoneans. He destroys all that and rebuilds the Temple Mount and the temple itself.
So this is an important place for a Christian to come and see, because this will really open up the Bible, won't it?
Right. So one of the things that Professor Aviona does when he builds this model is that he chooses specific sites that are described by Flavius Josephus in the city, and he specifically chooses important sites for Christians in Jerusalem, because one of the intentions of the site is to serve tourists. So this is why he chooses not only the Temple Mount and the temple, but for instance the Palace of Caiaphas on Mount Zion, and the Tomb of David on Mount Zion, and the Palace of Herod, and the Golgotha, of course, and the Bethesda pools, and many more other Christian important sites from the Gospels or stations of Jesus's actions in Jerusalem, or relating to very important historical moments with this regard. So I would say this is a must for every Christian that comes to Jerusalem.
There must be a lot of research that goes into this.
A lot of research. Built in the 60s, it holds all the research up to the 60s, but from the 60s onwards, as excavations really went very large in Jerusalem, both south of the Temple Mount in the city of David and next to the Temple Mount itself, and in the Western Hill, or as we know it today as the Jewish Quarter, vast excavations have taken place and are continuing as we speak. So we have much more information, and we are updating the model according to this information, but very carefully. Because as you may know, when you do excavations, archaeologists tend to argue about the results. So we don't change things that are under argument, but only things that are certain. For instance, one of the very important things that we've learned is that the pool of Siloam is much further south than the original place, and was actually a mikveh, a ritual bath, for the pilgrims coming to the temple to do a ritual bath before they go up to the temple, because only Jews that have taken a purified bath can enter the temple itself. And we will speak about that later when you see one of the finds from the temple in the galleries. So it holds a lot of research and a lot of results from excavations. And as I said, some of the things are speculations and are built as parallels to things that were found in other sites. For instance, you see that theater, that very Roman theater. We have not found that theater. We did find one seat and 2 tickets, and we know there was a theater because Flavius tells us so, but we don't know the exact location, and Aviona hypothesized that it's right there on the slopes of the western hill towards the temple, which is a very reasonable assumption, but no proof. So we're not changing that, for instance. There was a hippodrome or a horse race track, as you can see the footprint of it south of the Temple Mount. Excavations proved that it was not there. Something else was there, so we have taken it out. We do not know where to reposition it, so we have not repositioned it, but we know that there was a track like this. These 2 phenomena are very non-Jewish activities. They are very Roman pagan ones, but this is also a feature of Jerusalem of the 1st century, this combination between a very Jewish city to the Hellenistic Roman culture that comes in from the outside.
So as archaeology changes and proves things, you change with the model as well?
Yes, but we do it very moderately and very carefully.
Yep.
We are looking at the temple of the Second Temple period, but in fact the hill we're standing on is actually a sort of a concentration of temples or so, if you may use that expression. If we lift our eyes from the model for a moment, we see the parliament, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Architectonically, it's built like a Greek shrine. Looking further to the east, you can see the dome of the Shrine of the Book, another sort of temple. If we look to the west, we see the National Library in the Hebrew University, a different kind of temple for knowledge. And if we turn to the south, you see the museum itself, which is built like a temple on the hill and is a temple for culture. So it's a cluster of temples concentrated around, and as I said, divine intervention got this ancient temple to join all these modern temples. Yes. We're standing west of the city now, and we're looking towards the walls and the gates. The gate that you see right here is more or less the Jaffa Gate of today. And if you look further north, you see that the wall makes sort of a curve, and there's another little gate next to it, and on its side there's sort of a quarry. This is the place of Golgotha, and it's intentionally placed outside of the walls, as we know it was. This is the place where the Holy Sepulchre is built on top of the assumed place of the crucifixion and the tomb of Jesus. And if you walk into the old city of today through the Jaffa Gate and you go down David Street and then take a left, it would lead you exactly to that place, to the Holy Sepulchre of today. So for people wondering where the Holy Sepulchre is within the city of the Second Temple, and how did it relate to the Temple Mount, or how did it relate to the Antonia, where Jesus was arrested, and to the flagellation place next to it, it gives you a very good orientation to where these things happened and how close they are one to each other.
Okay, so we're walking east of the model now. Tell us a bit about this.
When we decided to place the model of Jerusalem here, which is west of the Shrine of the Book, we realized that it's actually the path that the people who wrote the scrolls took when they decided to escape to the desert. They actually left Jerusalem and walked eastwards to Qumran and to take refuge there. So we've decided to draw a path, or a tunnel actually, leading from Jerusalem to the Shrine of the Book, the House of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that walks the same direction into the Judean desert towards the Dead Sea, and eventually reaching the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So we're walking now through the museum, and the museum, it focuses on the history of Christianity. Tell us a bit about where we are now.
We've noticed that many of the visitors that come to the museum go to the Shrine of the Book, they see the model of Jerusalem, they sometimes come in to see exhibitions, but most of them are unaware of the fact that hugely important artifacts that point to the very beginnings of Christianity in the Holy Land are exhibited here in the galleries. So we've pointed out 10 stops like this within the permanent galleries that connect directly to the story, to the landscape, and to these crucial historical moments in the early Christianity or in the development of Christianity here in the Holy Land. One of them is the Temple Mount and the Temple in Jerusalem, and two of the most important finds coming from the Temple Mount that was destroyed by the Romans in 70 at the end of the Great Jewish Revolt are exhibited here. One of them is a fragment of an inscription in Greek, which is a part of the parapet that divided the Temple Mount into where everyone could have gone, and to the surroundings of the temple where only Jews could cross and go into the ritual of the temple. The inscription itself is in Greek, and it tells very specifically, and it was written in Greek so everyone could read it, because this was the international language at these times, that whoever crosses this line and is not a Jew or was not purified is sentenced to death by the high priest. It's the only instance where the high priest can sentence someone to death, because the country functions under Roman rule, and only the Roman procurator can sentence someone to death, as we very well know from the story of Jesus, the trial and the crucifixion. But in this instance, if someone crosses this border, there's no need for a Roman trial. And we know of a few cases like that. So this is a hugely important inscription, and in fact we know of this kind of parapet with inscriptions from Josephus Flavius that describes this, and also says that it was inlaid with inscriptions in Latin and in Greek.
So this is something that Jesus would have seen, the sign.
He has definitely seen and read these signs, and part of his activities on and the Temple Mount and around it are criticizing the activities and the priests on the Temple Mount. And we'll get to that in a minute with another find. So the other inscription next to it is in Hebrew, and it's also from the Temple Mount. It's actually a notice for the priest where to stand and blow the trumpet. It says in Hebrew, Lebeit Hatki'ah Leachriz, to the house of the trumpeting, to announce. And we understand that this is the place to announce the entry of Shabbat, of Saturday, when you have to cease work. And then again at the exit of Saturday, when you can resume work. So this is just a marker, but for the activity of the temple itself. So it was found below the Temple Mount, because it was, when the temple was destroyed, it was thrown down by the Romans into the street below.
So today in modern Israel, we have a siren that goes off for Shabbat. So this is the siren that they used.
Exactly. So the same practice that was here 2,000 years ago continue. And if you go to the market in Jerusalem today, on Friday afternoon, you'd hear those religious people with bugles walking through the streets and urging the merchants to close their shops for the entry of Shabbat. One of the exciting exhibits here is actually a graffito or incised on a plaster of the exterior wall of one of the houses of Jerusalem. And it very rarely describes implements of the temple: the menorah, the 7-branch candelabrum, the altar, and the showbread table, 3 of the most important artifacts in the ritual in the temple. We don't know where they are, and we don't know how they looked. There is no description from the time itself, and this incision, probably made by one of the priests that served in the temple and lived in that neighborhood, describe for us the menorah, one of the most important artifacts in the temple of Jerusalem. And right next to it you could see a pile of silver coins. These are shekels and half shekels. They are important to understand another story that is very well known and relates to Jesus. We all know that Jesus turns the tables of the money changers. But I think most of us don't stop to think why. What was he criticizing? The banking activity? What was the reason for that? The reason for that relates directly to these coins. Every Jew has to give a donation, every male has to give a donation yearly of half a silver shekel to the temple. Now it specifies exactly which kind of coin. This is the coin that we're looking at, this silver coin minted in Tyre, which is Lebanon of today. The reason for that is that the exact amount of silver is there, and this is the amount you need to donate. So people usually don't carry that much of money on them, or not in silver, and when they come to Jerusalem and they want to donate to the temple, they need to change their bronze coins into a half a shekel silver coin. And they go to money changers. And money changers do what they do until today. They take commission. And this enrages Jesus because it's taking commission from a holy donation. So they're making profit from a donation, and this is why he turns their tables. It's not because he's angry at the rate that they take. It's because he's angry about the fact that they take a rate at all from this holy donation. So this is one example of how material culture, archeology, will add a light to the stories that we read in the scriptures and put them in context. And this is an opportunity we have here at the museum to have more of a grasp or more of a real look of the stories that we read in the scriptures. So archaeology looks for remains from the past. Material culture remains, architecture, artifacts, whatever is left behind. But it's very rare to find objects or things that are related directly to historical figures. In the case of the trial and crucifixion of Jesus, we have two such stunning finds that relate directly to that moment. Actually, you may say, remains of two of the bad guys of the story. And the first one was accidentally discovered in Jerusalem, in the southern part of Jerusalem, in an area which was the necropolis, or the tomb area of Jerusalem of 1st century. And accidentally a tractor working on a garden dropped a wheel into a cave that was found to be the cave of the Caiaphas clan. And the most elaborate ossuary in that tomb that is exhibited here, ossuary is a bone box into which you collected the bones of the deceased a year after the burial. This was the practice in the Jewish society in Jerusalem and Judea in these times, to do family tombs in caves and to bury the dead, and then a year after come and collect the bones and seize the mourning period. So therefore, until today, we practice a year of mourning after the death. And these ossuaries were sometimes decorated, sometimes just plain, and some of them have the names of the deceased. It is a change from the previous practice where family members were all buried in the same cave and all their bones were gathered together in one room. Here, maybe with the introduction of Western philosophies, of Greek philosophies, individualism suddenly appears, and each one wants to be buried separately, because who knows, in the time of resurrection, maybe you want to be alone, or maybe you want to be separated from others that would have a different fate. So the bones of one person were found in this ossuary, and the inscription on it in Aramaic, twice, once on the side and one on the back, says Yosef bar Caifa. This is Joseph Caiaphas that we know so well from the story in the Gospels, and only in the Gospels, that arrested Jesus and handed him over to Pontius Pilate.
So this is actually the bones of Caiaphas the high priest.
This is actually the bone box of them. The bones are not here. Right. By Israeli law, bones that are discovered in excavations have to be reburied in a ritual, in a religious ritual. So the Ministry of Religion takes care of that.
But when you found it, it had bones in it?
When we found it, it had bones in it, but all the members of the skeleton. It of course did not have a note saying, I sentenced Jesus. So we are not 100% sure. We are never 100% sure in archaeology, but it does have the full name of the high priest that we know served in the time of Jesus. And from the Gospels, we know that he is reported to have arrested Jesus. The time is right, the scale is right, the place is right. So it's most probably are the bones of Caiaphas. And right next to it, not less stunning find, that was found in Caesarea. Caesarea was the capital of the province of Judea, of the Roman province of Judea, on the seashore of the Mediterranean. And one of the steps in the theater, the Roman theater that was built there, originally built by Herod the Great, had a Latin inscription. And the Latin inscription says, Tibereum Pontius Pilatus Praefectus Judea. In other words, dedication of a building to Tiberius, the emperor, most probably a lighthouse in the port of Caesarea, was done by Pontius Pilate, the procurator of Judea. This is the man that crucified Jesus, and this is the only inscription in the world that mentions his name. He was here for a procurator for 12 years, and not even his coins that he minted bear his name. So this is the only sign that he left behind with his name.
This must be a huge find.
It's a huge find. It was found already many years ago, and we've chosen to exhibit these two finds one next to the other, although they are more than 100 years apart in time, because they relate to this phenomenal story. And so not only one exhibit or a person, but two important historical persons that are shown on archaeological finds. It's really unique.
So this is the bad guy part of the museum, is it?
This is not only the bad guy, it's also the bad action, because right next to them we exhibit another unique find. It's also coming from an ossuary, but this time a very plain ossuary, totally not decorated, found in the tomb in Jerusalem. The inscription on it says, Yochanan, son of Chagakul. We don't know who Yochanan was, but we do know that he was crucified. This skeleton that was found inside had a huge iron nail driven through its heel. And this is the only tangible evidence or find of crucifixion in the world. Wow. Although Romans have crucified thousands, if not more, people for severe crimes, of treason or theft or other severe crimes, we have never found in excavations or otherwise any skeleton of a crucified person. This is in Jerusalem in the times of Jesus. So it's a hugely important find. And although we don't know what the crime of Yochanan was, Yochanan is John, he evidently was a bad enough crime to be executed in such a torturous way as crucifixion was. It also shows that the way he was crucified is different from what we know through the artistic later descriptions. You can see in the drawing exhibited next to it that his feet were nailed to the side of the beam, not to the front of the beam, one on top of the other. Each foot was nailed separately to the side of the beam, and we do not know why this specific nail was not extracted from the skeleton and taken elsewhere, or in other words, we don't know why we have never found any nails in the skeletons of people that were crucified. One of the reasons may be that things related to death were many times used as amulets to protect against death. So maybe nails were used in this way in antiquity, and we do know that nails are used as amulets until today.
Would that be like we use a cross as a Christian? They would put like a nail around themselves to protect themselves?
Exactly. It is the same, and you can see that until today people wear nails to remember crucifixion. So wearing crosses goes to the same practice of remembering that moment and being protected by it. So it's three unique exhibits that relate to that very crucial moment of trial and crucifixion of Jesus in Jerusalem. We've seen several finds that relate to biblical times, or Old Testament times, that relate to the time of Jesus, directly to the temple or to the trial and crucifixion, and we're taking a leap now 300 or 400 years forward to early Christianity as it formed here in the Holy Land, or actually to the transformation of this land to be the Holy Land. In the 4th century, with the rediscovery of the Golgotha and the true cross and the empire turning Christian, the land of Israel becomes the Holy Land and draws a huge attention and a huge number of people and huge pilgrimage that continues until today. And with it, a huge development. So this period, which we call the Byzantine period, from the 4th century all the way up to the 8th century until the Arab conquest, is a huge development of churches, monasteries, hospices, hospitals, and a huge array of services, all meant for the pilgrims to the Holy Land and to the holy places. And one of the things that is developed here are ancient churches and the form of ancient churches, because until the early 4th century, We don't know of a form of a house of prayer in Christianity. We know of what we call the Domus Ecclesiae, which is our private houses that are used for the congregation and for prayers, but we don't know how to identify them architectonically. In the 4th century, we already have churches that establish a well-formed plan in the form of a basilica with a bema, a raised platform on one side, and an altar and a holy relic that usually marks the importance of the spot, and a baptisterium for baptizing all the new members into Christianity, because a huge amount of people, Jews and pagans, transform into Christianity in this period. So many of the churches have baptisteria, not for children, but for adults, to transform into Christianity. What we've done in the museum is that we've reconstructed a bema of a church, of a Byzantine church, and it's actually built from remains of 17 different churches that we put together, and they remarkably look like they are originally from the same church, with phenomenal remains of an altar from the Judean desert and relics from the Galilee, and a baptisterium from Herodium, and chancel screens from the Negev desert all the way to Galilee, and mosaics and crosses and pendants and capitals. So you have a chance of seeing how a Christian church in the Byzantine period looked like. And not less interesting is right next to it you can see a synagogue from the same period from the Holy Land. Synagogues and churches were very much alike architectonically. They were built actually by the same artisans, and they looked very much alike, with a raised bema platform on one side and chancel screens separating the priests from the congregation. But of course the symbolism was very different. While churches are decorated with crosses and scenes from the Holy Scriptures, synagogues are decorated with menorahs and scenes from the Old Testament. And these two religions, which developed side by side at the same place and then continue to develop into architectonic forms and architectonic shapes, make a point of being different one from each other, as they are at the same place and in a way competing for members in the congregations. So we have reconstructed the bema of the synagogue in Susia, next to this Christian bema of a church. And you can see some of the decorations in churches and synagogues. For instance, you can see a huge mosaic from Kisufim in the Negev, but it portrays only hunting scenes and imaginary creatures. Nothing religious about it. That's on the floor. Because on the floor it's forbidden to have Jesus or any of the other holy figures. They would be on the walls, in frescoes or in stone, or gilded mosaics, like you see in this fresco from Caesarea. But if you look at synagogue mosaics, it's the total opposite. Synagogue's mosaic would have the temple and the holy implements, the menorah and the shofar, and they have biblical characters. King David and Samson and other biblical heroes are on the floor, and you can step on them. And even the biblical law is cited in Hebrew on the floor of the synagogue. It gives you an idea that this huge change in concept in Judaism that occurs here, the previous period, the Second Temple period, forbid doing human characters or animal characters of any kind, because paganism was the threat. And in this period, the competition is Christianity. So therefore, Jews go back to depicting biblical stories and the temple, which is already destroyed 300 years, because they want to make a point of remembering these and making a difference between churches and synagogues. So it's a chance to see a huge, rare moment in the 4th to 7th centuries where Christianity and Judaism existed side by side, practiced side by side, in very similar buildings but very different practice. So the Holy Land is a field of development of architecture and services for pilgrims, because pilgrims come here in millions through the Byzantine time. And it's actually an industry. It's a holy tourism. And it continues until today in the same manner. And one of the things that we do find is signs of this development, or in other words, modern development of Jerusalem. When we do new roads or new trains or lay new cables, we find archeology and we find signs of development of the Byzantine period. And the two inscriptions that we stand next to are two signs of that. The mosaic one was found only a few months ago near the Damascus Gate as they were excavating for a new cable system. And it's in Greek, and it mentions Justinian, the emperor, maybe the greatest developer of the Holy Land, and Constantine, the abbot, who built a place for pilgrims, a hostel probably, right outside the Damascus Gate. The inscription above it, made in plaster, was found 40 years ago in the old city, and it's actually the basement or the cistern, the water cistern, of the largest church that existed in Jerusalem, called then the Nea Church, the new church, established by Justinian. And it mentions the same two people, Justinian and Constantine the abbot. So these two guys developed Jerusalem for pilgrims 1,500 years ago. So this holy tourism coming into the land went through a holy itinerary. They went to see all the holy places. They went through the biblical sites. They went through the stops in the story of Jesus, through where Jesus passed. They wanted to see holiness. They wanted to touch holiness. And they wanted to take it home with them. And they did. And we find endless number of souvenirs that were taken by pilgrims back to their homelands in Europe, in North Africa, and in other places. And we find them along the tour that they took. And sometimes we find here in Jerusalem souvenirs of people that came from Egypt or came from Syria, from other holy places. So we find collections of souvenirs of holy places. And these souvenirs are in many shapes and forms. A lot of them are flasks, containers, small containers, whether ceramic containers or glass containers. And on them are imprinted the scenes that describe the holy sites that they were taken from. They contained oil from the holy places, oil that was put on the holy relics kept in the churches and then poured out into those flasks and could be taken home as medicine, as remedy. Or they contained oil from the oil lamps that burned in the holy places. Sometimes they would take earth and put it into the holy places, for instance, the Holy Sepulchre, and then take the earth out and form sort of little shaped coins from earth imprinted with the scenes. So we have scenes of the visitation, we have scenes of the Annunciation, and we have scenes of the baptism, and all the stories that we know so well from the Gospels are on these flasks and eulogia coins that pilgrims buy here as they move from one stop to the other, and they take it home. And sometimes we find these eulogia coins a little bit damaged on the edges. It's not because they were broken, they were used this way. These are ancient aspirins. You'd take them home and you'd grind them a bit into a glass of wine or to a flask of oil and drink them as medicine or as a quality of promising a need that you'd want. So this, you may say, business of holy souvenirs continues until today. Every holy site that you go to in the Holy Land, you'd have a shop with those souvenirs that are offered, and we all do buy them to remember those holy places that we visited, and we want to have a memorandum from them.
So these are basically like 1,700 years old, are they?
Yes, all of these, from the cross pendants to those reliquiaries from churches to those flasks, are 1,500 years old.
Wow. Well, Dudi, thank you very much. It's important when people come to visit the land that they come here to the Israeli Museum, isn't it?
It's phenomenal, I think, opportunity for people to see in a very short time so much about early Christianity that they don't see in the sites themselves, and a handful of unique finds that are concentrated here at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.